The key to being a better gardener is to deal with your soil. Soil is the number one thing. If you can do only one thing to be a better gardener, that's going to be improving your soil. And we have no better person to talk about soils than Dr. Bill Fonteno from here at NC State University, where he's been a professor of horticulture for 42 years. He teaches courses in plant growth and development and greenhouse production, but his research expertise and where he really shines in terms of helping growers become more successful is in horticultural substrate, urban soils, like what you have in your garden. He's been the technical advisor for the National Mulch and Soil Council for 15 years and developed the quality program for all consumer potting soils, soil additives, and mulches sold in the United States. So I think it is safe to say that Dr. Fonteno knows what he's talking about when he is talking about soils. So, Bill, thank you so much for having us. Bill has given talks before, and as somebody who has done this professional horticulture for 2.5 decades, I got to tell you, every time I hear Bill give a talk, I come away with things that I can do to improve how I garden. So I'm really excited to share him with you today. Bill, turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to try to get this thing started. So bear with us for just a moment. Well, thanks, Mark. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to gather with people here at the JCRA. Talking to people that come into the JCRA is some of the most rewarding things that I do because everyone is so interested in what's going on. They just really are. And so it's great to be able to do that. So today we're going to talk about improving your soils. But one of the things about gardening in the South is such a wonderful place just to garden in general. And there's nothing that, in my mind, that helps you do that better than to have a really great soil to do that. It inspires you to grow things that you might not want to do. Just as a moment, we are at the JCRA, and I just want to mention J.C. Raulston. Many of you that have had the opportunity to actually work with J.C. remember J.C. like this. Just a wonderful fellow. I remember J.C. like this because he was one of my advisors for my Ph.D. committee, and I was one of the very first grad students for J.C. that he ever had. So one of the claims to fame I have is that I was one of J.C.'s students. And he imparted so much wonderful things about gardening. As Mark was saying, I've done this for a very long time. Teaching has always been a wonderful thing for me back in the day. But what I also inherited from being around J.C. is a need to go to places and see for myself. And he was a wonderful traveler, and he inspired me to do the same thing. And so we've been to many different locations and many different locales looking at horticulture and particularly soils-based information for just a large number of years. I've been to about 26 different countries so far in my work, and it's amazing how similar most people are when it comes to gardening. It's amazing. Mark already mentioned work with the Mulch and Soil Council and certified soils and things like this. So there's just been a large amount of effort that we've put in over the years to looking at soils and soil-related issues. Okay, so if we're talking about soils, the Soil Conservation Service, if you want to find out what the soil is that you have in your area, you can go to the Soil Conservation Service and look it up. You can find out what you've got. They have done wonderful work over the years of looking at the soils and mapping where the soils are in the U.S. And there are literally 33,000 different designations about soils. 33,000 types, all right? And in fact, in Wake County, there are 22 soil types listed. 22 soil types in the state, just in Wake County itself. Now, if we were sitting together in a room by ourselves, I would ask you, hey, who here knows what kind of soil type you have? Now, I will also bet you that most of you, no matter where you live, no matter what soil type is listed for your particular location, you may not have that soil type. That may not be what you're doing. And that's not because it wasn't mapped properly. It's because of what's been done to the soils. All right. People that have trouble with soil, a lot of people think that it's their fault, that they're just not what's going on. But the soil is not exactly what we think it is. So let me give you an example. Here's what a soil profile looks like of a natural native soil. And the soil portion is really above this red line. That's the soil part. And it's about a foot deep, roughly. The top part is the O or horizon, they call it the horizon, with sort of level spots. It's about 2 to 3 inches deep, and that's where the organic matter is. The area below that, the A horizon, that's topsoil. That is soil. That is what you plant in, that's what you grow in, and that's what we all think we have. Okay? So that's what we're looking for, and that's the part that's been classified in all of these different soil series that people talk about. All right? So what soil do you have? Well, it's problematic. And it's problematic because soil in itself takes a very, very long time to make. All right. And of course, we've got this O and A horizon. Okay. How long do you think it took to make that soil? How long do you think it took nature to do this? Well, if through natural weathering and the like, it takes about 10,000 years to build soil. 10,000 years for nature to actually build soil. So soil didn't start showing up until after the rocks were here. And all soil is basically just smaller and smaller pieces of rock. And all mineral soil is just rock. That's all it is, just little tiny pieces of rock. And it's the blend of those materials, the O and A horizons, that actually make soil. The problem we have in urban areas is that soils and construction do not play well together. They don't get along. You cannot build on real soil. It doesn't hold up. It shifts too much. And so soil and construction don't get along. So the first thing you do if you're building something is you strip off the soil. You literally take a front end loader and you push the soil up. And hopefully, if you're lucky, they will push that topsoil over to the side, leave it there, construct whatever they need to construct, and then push it back. That would be the ideal thing to do. And there are many places that this does happen. But in the construction business, there is something else that tends to go on. This piled up pile of topsoil is actually worth money. And many construction contractors need a little extra cash flow. And so what they'll do is they'll sell it. Once they push it up, they will sell the topsoil to get some cash flow to build things, and then they put it back. But they simply order topsoil and they bring it back. And that topsoil may not be from the original site, more than likely is not. So even though there are 22 soil types, say in Wake County, if yours is pushed up to the side and your home is built, and then they try to push it, and then they bring new material back, that new material you could have a 1 in 22 chance of getting what you had before. So as a caveat to this, if you are in construction, if you're building something and you like the soil you have, you might want to tell them to keep that and not push it away, and then make sure they put it back. But more than likely, it won't be. More than likely, it won't be what you had before. And in some cases, it's really not really very good soil. So here's an example of what we're talking about. This is a soil profile here in Raleigh. And what that soil is, and you see here in the top, is called a sisal clay soil. And people think, well, clay soil is bad. Well, no, clay soils are really very good if it's a true soil. And that's what we have here. The top 8 to 9 inches is soil. But if you take that away, this is what most people have that they're trying to deal with. This is what you're working with to grow your garden and things in. So, and this is basically, in this case, just clay. This is subsoil. This should not see the light of day for 10,000 years. And yet, many of us deal with this. Does this look familiar to anybody? I can't see your heads nodding, but a lot of people go, well, that's exactly what I have. This is what I've got to deal with. And the reason why you struggle with soil is it's not what you think. It is only maybe a little bit of soil, but it's mostly subsoil. Okay. And in fact, there's a term for this, And this term is called urban soils. And the urban soil that one deals with is a hodgepodge of any number of things. It could be construction debris. It could be just the subsoil clay. It could be something foreign that has been dumped into the area to bring back into this material. It could be any number of things. And so trees, shrubs, and all of our gardening and plant materials are all subject to things that really they shouldn't be subjected to. And this is true more often than not. This is truly the way it is. And because of that, the characteristics of urban soil aren't what we would like. So urban soil characteristics are not anything that we would really like to have. For example, the first thing is it truly lacks any kind of soil structure. It doesn't have that. It's just clay. If it looks terrible, that's really because it is. It's not really designed to do that. So it lacks structure from the very beginning, doesn't have it. Most of the time, it is more compacted than what we'd like to see, so it doesn't drain well at all. Right? Am I describing things that are going on in your garden right now? Yeah. And also, there's pH issues. There's nutritional problems that come along with this. And so many times, the things that we're stuck with are not true soils. It's called urban soil. It has its own classification. Okay? Now, like Mark had said, I've been in the horticultural soils business for a very long time. And as it turns out, we've got different groups of things that we work with. We do work with the native soils. And the native soils is exactly what everybody wants. Native soils are the things farmers deal with, right? Native soils are things that we grow our vegetables and fruit trees and ornamentals in the ground. It's wonderful things. And that's a whole world of that. But we also know that many of our ornamental crops and much of our crops today are moving into containers. And there's a huge container industry for horticulture. And growing in containers is a whole different thing. And the soils that we use there, or substrates that we use there, are very different. So there's some overlap, but there's a lot of it that's not. So it's kind of its own entity. But what we're dealing with in the garden is the urban soil system. And that system is different again. Some of it's native, it's a little bit like containers, but it's its own thing. And this whole area of urban soils is really problematic. It's really problematic. You think it's a problem for you in your garden, but there are cities that have major issues in drainage because of the urban soil system. For example, many cities, when it rains, it floods, and they can't get rid of their water as well. And part of the reason is the soils that they use, their urban soils, are very, very, very dense. And so a move that we've been seeing over the last 10 years is called the construction of sponge cities. All right. This is where they're trying to get the soils in the city proper area themselves to drain better and to hold more water, like sponges. In fact, even SpongeBob has joined the fray to help promote this type of thing. And this is not just in the US, but it's all over the world. In fact, we've worked with particularly the municipalities in Beijing and in Shanghai in the amelioration of their urban soils, because it's such a huge problem. And trying to fix these urban soils to make them to where they work. What we're really trying to do is just make them more like the native soils we all think we have. But then what it is we don't. So really, the problem is in the garden is we don't have what we think we have. We don't have soils. Now, you can, we have different options for this process. You can just replace the topsoil. You can literally buy topsoil and put it in your area. And there's two basic ways to do that. You can go to a topsoil company, okay, and they will have real topsoil. It's a blend of that organic layer and that A horizon together, and you can buy this straight out. But generally, there's no testing that's done on them. They don't measure pH or they don't measure EC perhaps, and they certainly don't classify them as a particular, like a Wagram soil or a clay loam or whatever. That's not done. So, and this is where a lot of the people in construction will buy the topsoil and bring it back. Okay. So you can get topsoil here, but you can't necessarily be specific to the soil itself. These are generally just available in bulk loads and will show up in large trucks and dumped on your property, and then you can spread it out and put it on. So that's one option for you. What most gardeners tend to do is to look for these things in retail. And you can find topsoil in the retail. And when we talk about retail, we're talking about gardening centers and big box stores like Lowe's, Home Depot, and Walmart. But these are all just organic matter. There's nothing but organic matter in them. In fact, there's no actual topsoil in them. None whatsoever. And you think, well, isn't that a bad thing? Well, not necessarily, as we'll talk about. But it's actually not topsoil. And how do you know? You can tell very easily whether or not you've got topsoil in a retail bag. And you know how you can tell? You pick it up. You just pick it up. If you can pick it up, it ain't topsoil. Let me show you. Retail topsoil, as general rule, is about 12 pounds a cubic foot. All right. So a 3-pound bag of retail topsoil will weigh what? 36, 40 pounds. All right. And you can find plenty of 40-pound topsoil. Okay? Actual native topsoil weighs 80 pounds a cubic foot. 80 pounds. All right. So a 3-pound bag of real topsoil is 240 pounds. So if you can pick that up, more power to you. But you're not loading many of those in the back of your station wagon or your SUV and taking it home. So we don't have true topsoil in these places, but it's organic matter instead. Now, you might think that this is problematic. And so, well, what are you supposed to do? Well, the good news is we can build good garden soil. And it's not particularly difficult to figure out what to do. You just have to be able to do it. So it's really not a major issue or a major problem, but we can build it. And that's the mindset that most people have to have when they're working on soils, is that whenever you're gardening, you all need to be also sort of constantly building your soils at the same time. Now, how do you figure out what to do? Well, a lot of people, like today, a lot of people are looking at this on YouTube. And so you go to YouTube for these things and you look to see what people do. It's really interesting because there's a lot of different ways to do things. And people, when they talk about gardening advice, at least the questions they ask me, they say, well, I saw one video and it says to do it like this. And someone else says, no, you need to do it like this. And I don't know which one to do. What we're going to talk about today is, here are the basics, here's the facts of what's going on, and here are the options. And what I will tell you is there's just lots of options for you. Now, J.C. Raulston, again, had a great comment many years ago. He says, as far as gardeners are concerned, he said gardeners are more like chefs than scientists. All right? So what they do, and you see this, you've seen cooking shows, and you see a show about how a particular chef cooks chicken. All right. But we know for a fact that we watch this and they're very specific. And it said, it's got to be just like this. And you do it like this. And this is how it works. And we think in ourselves, well, that's an interesting way to cook chicken. But we all know that there's many ways to cook chicken and many ways to make meals. So we take these as maybe opportunities and then we utilize this information. But we don't have to pick one way or the other. We just can utilize this information take it with a grain of salt. So what I'm going to do now is show you the things you need to do to build soils and what those options are. Okay, so if we're going to talk about building soil, what are we starting with? Well, here's that Cecil clay loam we talked about. Let's take the soil off, and here's what we have left. All right, if this is what we have to start with, the question is, what's in it? And the other part of that is what's actually missing. So what's missing in here that we had in the other? And there are two things that are missing. One is organic matter. Organic matter in soils is a small component, generally between 5 and 10% in a true mineral soil, but it's there. Here, in subsoil, there's none, almost none. There's no organic matter in here. There's not supposed to be organic matter in here. It's not natural for organic matter to be in a subsoil with soil on top. It just isn't. But so organic matter is one big piece. The other piece are the microbes. Most of subsoils have almost no life in them at all. There's none, almost none. If you're digging in your soil, all right, and at the top you might find a few earthworms, for example. If you dig a foot or 2 feet down, do you find an earthworm 2 feet down? No. You don't find microbes in the subsoil. And there's a reason for that. So, okay, so we're missing these two things. So how do we rebuild it? How do we fix this? Well, basically we put back what we don't have. And it's really easy in one sense, because basically we add organic matter. The key to building soils is putting organic matter back into what we have. Okay? We add organic matter. Organic matter is a wonderful thing. Organic matter breaks down, and that's the nature of organic matter is it will break down. And as it breaks down, it releases humates. And those humates are just this little oozy liquid. And if you get enough of them, it's this little black liquid. But it literally oozes into the soil and it coats the particles. It literally does. It separates those particles and it aggregates them together and it becomes a soil. And by making it into these aggregates, it allows for percolation of water. It allows for air to move in and oxygen to be exchanged. And it builds the soil. Okay, so the key of the construction is to put organic matter in here to do its work. And the other thing that organic matter does is that it's food. And it's food for the second part of things that are missing, the microbes. These microbes, there are billions and billions of these things in the soil. And there's all kinds of things. My old soils prof at Texas A&M called them critters, okay? And if we look at the kinds of soil critters that we have in these things, there are many things. Lots of bacteria and fungi, particularly that break down the inorganic matter, okay? Algae, protozoa of all kinds, and even nematodes. And yes, there are nematodes that are actually beneficial in the soil, not just the ones that attack plants. The ones that we think of more often are bigger things like earthworms, okay? Now, some of these you can't see, but they're there. And in fact, they're there in such high amounts, it's amazing. If we take 1 acre of soil and measure all of these kind of critters that are in there and weigh them, it's amazing how many there are. And why are they there? They're there because they feed on this organic matter. The organic matter that we've put in actually is the food that they eat. And as they multiply, they make tons of these things. In mineral soils, in good natural native soils, there's approximately 5 tons of these soil critters per acre. 5 tons of these materials per acre. Right? Earthworms are a good thing. We can see earthworms, right? And if you see a lot of earthworms, we know that our soil's doing pretty well. Earthworms, do you know how many earthworms there are in an acre of soil? Just a good native soil without doing anything extra? There's at least 1 million earthworms per acre. 1 million. It's a lot. It's a lot. So the life will come back if we add the organic matter. Okay, so if we build the garden soil, there's a mantra that we have to have in order to build it. And it was in the title of what we said before. And that was, if you build it, they will come. All right? If you build it, they will come. When I give a talk like this with a live audience, basically, I just have to say, if you build it, and they all tell me they will come. Where does this come from? Obviously, if you're over 40, you know, because it's from the Field of Dreams, a movie set in Iowa. And it's not actually about soils, but the mantra is still there. but it works very well in soils. If you build it, if you build your soil, you will get all the microbes that's going on. And so in essence, for us to build life into these soils, all we do is set the table. All we do is say, here, you put the table out, you put the big buffet out there, and lo and behold, they show up. And they show up. And you think, wow, that's easy. So we don't have to add special things. Well, if I get this little, special juju juice, this will really help my soil. No. All you need to do is add organic matter to it. So it's kind of a simple process. The problem is, most of the time when we're doing this, we're not adding enough. And so the caveat to this is that this is, because you're building, this is actually going to take more than you might think it will take to do this. Let me show you. Okay, so we have, let's say you have a plot, and it's 5 feet wide and 20 feet long. And this is what you want to do, and you want to build the soil in here. So you got 100 square feet. Generally, if you're going to amend the soil down to a certain level, it's generally around 6 inches, let's say 6, just for grins. The amount of material for any type of soil that you're going to build, you need to put 25 to 50% by volume of organic matter into that. Okay? So if you're going to go 6 inches down into the soil and amend it, you need to layer about 1.5 to 3 inches of organic matter on the top and then till it in to 6 inches. Okay? And you go, well, that's not that big a deal, right? That's not that big a deal. What that turns out to be, though, is 1/2 to 1 cubic yard of organic matter that you need to put in this area. All right? So generally, these come into, if you go to the big boxes or the garden centers and they sell you 2 cubic foot bags, you'll need 6 to 12 2 cubic foot bags to amend the soil. 6 to 12. All right, 25 to 50%. Did a recent check just 2 days ago, and the cost of these materials are about $4. That's the minimum per bag for a 2 cubic foot bag. All right, you can spend more than that, but the least expensive it is about $4 a cubic foot bag. So it's about $2 a cubic foot. That means that you will spend $25 to $50 to amend this bed. Okay? If you go to the retail store and do that, now if you got one bed, that may be actually the way to go, the simple way. But if you've got more area, or if you want to do bigger amounts, then you can see that can begin to add up. Now, fortunately, the kind of organic matter you use is not as important. All right? So the question is, what kind of organic matter can we use? Well, you can find things that are listed, like topsoils, soil conditioners. Okay, they're all organic matter, so they're all very usable in this. You can find manures, particularly cow manure or poultry manure, and that works out pretty well too. Worm castings, wonderful things to add. Okay, but you don't want to add them as just organic matter. You want to add them more as maybe perhaps more of a nutrient supplement. And you can get good quality compost from certified composters and put in there. Okay, so these would be options that are available to go pick up and purchase and to use. But you can also use any kind of plant residue that you have. So things like grass clippings, leaves from the fall, yard trimmings in your own yard. You can get a bulk load of bark fines to put in there, or even wood chips. Any of these things will work, as well as any of those other products. Any of this will work, and any of this will build your soil. The difference in these is basically how quickly that it works. Most of these things, some of these things like grass clippings and leaves break down very quickly within just a few months. Yard trimmings, a little more, barks, wood chips, it takes longer. But for my money, if you've got a lot to do, then what you want to do is to find maybe the cheapest material you can find in your area, or what's plentiful, or what's available. You can go to your local, like we have a place that does composting, okay? that you can take your clippings and you take it to the city or the county, and then they'll just take it for you. You can go there and buy some of that compost or materials that they've put together. And generally that's not very expensive. Sometimes it's $10, $15, $20 a pickup truckload, things like that. So you can find cheaper sources of materials depending on how much you're going to use. But the key is to use organic matter. Now, the good news is, as far as building the soil, it doesn't particularly matter. It does make a difference, but a little bit of time and it all breaks down. Okay, so we want to add organic matter, and we want that organic matter, but we can pick and choose what organic matter we use. Now, the question is, what do you do? How do you build the soils? Well, for the most part, I think it's best if most homeowners or gardeners actually define the beds they want to use. Okay, you can amend your entire area, like your entire lawn and everything else. But if you do that, that's an awful lot of material. And in fact, you may have to roll the soil after you till it all up, simply because it would have too much aeration and you would need to level it. So I like to restrict my building process to define beds. So you can pick and choose where you're going to go. All right? And there are different ways to do this, of course. You can put it into a traditional garden plot, particularly if you're going to grow vegetables or things like this. Then it's always in it. This is sort of the traditional way. You define your area and you put it out. And what a lot of them are, at least in the past, this is on the back side of this fellow's property. It's sort of where his garden is so he can grow his vegetables. But what we're seeing today is more of an explosion of people trying to make their bed areas even more ornamental, even if they're not putting ornamentals in them. Okay, so raised garden beds are really, really taking off. It's always been an option for people, and you can incorporate it directly into the ground. But we're seeing this where you define the bed, it's actually raised up some, and it's actually a wonderful way to garden. Raised beds can be ornamental, just in their construction, and yet you can grow vegetables and flowers or anything you want in these raised beds. So I want to make a little bit of a push for raised beds because I think they're easier to work with and you can have more success with these things. One of the reasons is because you can actually have more intense production out of a raised bed in that same square footage than you would in a large garden plot, because you can specialize that and you can add a little more to it. You don't have to do all of them at one time. You can do them, space them out, do one or two this year and a couple more next year. You can sort of expand it as you want to. But one of the best things about this is you can literally be in the garden without compaction. One of the things about what raised beds does is allow you to walk in between the beds. And there is almost nothing more pleasurable to me than to walk in the garden. It's one thing to look at it from outside, but to be in it is great. But if you have a big garden plot and you're literally walking in it to harvest your materials or to see what's going on or to bring your children in and show them what's happening, then you're tramping all over the soil and you're compacting it in different ways. Whereas if you are in raised beds, you can view it, you can reach the materials, but you're not actually damaging the soils. You can also have very specialized beds. You can have one for roses. You can have one for tomatoes. You can have one for bulb crops and things like this. So you can specialize these beds because they're all individualized. And then you can also rotate crops among these beds. My wife's father was a preacher, and he planted 4 tomato plants in his garden every year: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay? 4 tomato plants, just 4. So in our house, we had 4 tomato plants. We had Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if I planted them in the same spot year after year after year, they're more susceptible to disease. And so rotating them through with other crops and moving them around is a good thing. So you can rotate among these beds pretty easily for the same thing. So the raised garden beds give you visually appealing areas and functionality all at the same time. We not only have decks today, we have outdoor living areas, all right? So we're viewing the outside, and raised beds just fit right into that process. So, but you can incorporate it or put them in raised beds. Now, the other question is, how deep? How much do you need? How deep do you have to make these things? Well, that really depends on what you're planting. But one of the caveats about this is you got to be careful, because you can't look at the grass that's growing as a sign of good turf. Grass will fool you. And grass will fool you. And the reason it'll fool you is because you don't need any soil to grow grass. This is grass that's been on a parking lot for 3 weeks. All right. Now, it's not designed to be that way, but this is sod, okay, rolled up. So it's got a little layer of soil that comes with it. And here, the sod showed up when it was supposed to for this construction site, but the contractor was 3 weeks behind. Well, but they couldn't leave it all rolled up and on pallets this way, so they spread it out in the parking lot. And they watered it. This photo was taken 2.5 weeks after they put it out, and they are mowing the grass because the grass is growing. You don't need good soil or a lot of soil to grow grass. You just need irrigation. I'm being a little facetious there, but that's really the key. So seeing somebody's lawn and saying, boy, they've got a great lawn, they must have good soil, that didn't mean anything. It means it's only this deep. So what are the depths that we need to have? Well, if you're talking turf, it's only about 2 to 3, 4 inches. But if you're talking annuals, maybe a little bit more, 3 to 5 inches. Vegetables in itself, about the same. Maybe a little deeper, particularly if you're growing root vegetables at all. You need a place for them to develop. And so about 3 to 6 inches is for most of the annuals and vegetables that you have. If you're going shrubbery, the bigger the shrub, the little more you need. So you may be 6 to 8 inches here. And trees are a different story. Trees are different because they get bigger, they need anchorage. And so I said 12 to 18 inches, but you just don't till them that. You've got tree pits and things like that. And that's a little bit more than what we want to talk about. So when you're doing trees, that's a different subject that we're not going to truly address all of that here. So anyway, but you see the depth you have or need. So back in this case where you've got foundation plantings and then you've got a few trees, then you need the turf. You need to have about 3 inches of soil. Shrubbery, you need about 6. And the trees themselves, you need more than a foot. Okay? All right. So now we're getting down to the last parts of this. What do? How do you add organic matter? And there's 2 basic ways to do that. Incorporation is the most traditional way to do it. This is how most people add organic matter to their soils. Okay? And you can do it by hand, and you can do a great job by hand. Here you can see this lovely lady is amending her garden plot. It's a raised bed, obviously, but she is working it with a spade and incorporating her materials, and it'll do great. You don't need any special tools to do this, but you can use ways to do this. And if you're talking about gardens mostly, you're talking about tilling or incorporating it, and you can do that with machines. All right? You can either do it by hand or with tillers, but this is the second part. That's the caveat. One, it is you need a lot of organic matter. And the second thing is you need to put it in. And that takes patience, or it takes some extra strength and oomph to be able to do this. And believe me, whether you're doing it by hand or standing behind a tiller, it's going to take a little bit of effort to make that happen. Now, tillers, for me, this is the way that I would incorporate it in, because to me, it does a great job. This is the kind of tiller that I have. It's a wonderful thing. In fact, it is the best tool that I own, and I'm a big tool guy. And this is my favorite thing. I use it twice a year. I only use it a couple of times, but it is the greatest thing to get behind that and incorporate materials and break up and use the soil. It's a wonderful thing to do. I also have a small tiller, a smaller one too. It doesn't get as deep as the other, but it's great to use around foundations, and it's great to use for weeding in between during the year. But regardless of what you're doing for tilling, basically, and if you're doing it by hand, you want to do the same thing. You want to break up the soil. So you want to run the tiller over the soil itself, down as deep as you can, and probably that's about 6, 8 inches at the most. Then you do this to break up the soil. Then you put a layer of the organic matter on the top, about 1 to 3 inches, okay? And then you till it in, incorporate it. So you till it twice. You till once for the material for the soil. 2, you layer it, and 3, you till it in. And that's a great way to do this. Okay? Now, again, 25 to 50% by volume. And so if you got 6 inches down, you want to put 1.5 to 3 inches on top and incorporate it in. And it does a wonderful job. Now, this used to be where I would stop years ago talking about this. But in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a lot of work done on mulching. And what they found is that mulches too will break down, and they release humates into the soil as well. And these humates that they have will aggregate the soils. So in fact, you can take, and they've done this, where they take a bare ground that's undisturbed, and they simply put mulch on the top of it. And they put several inches of mulch on the top, and they leave it. And they leave it there for 3 years or 4 years. And what they find later when they move the mulch back is that they've actually created some soil underneath it. Underneath it. So we can use mulching as a way to help build the soils. We usually think about mulch as not that way, but as, regulating temperatures, reducing water loss, etc. But also mulch is part of the building process. So we can use that. Now, the key here is to use mulches that actually break down. Make sure you use materials that will break down and will help in the process. Now, there is another option based on that we're seeing, and it's all on YouTube and the like, and that is layering instead of incorporation. And here, you simply layer organic matter on top of the soil without working it in at all, and then you plant directly into the layers. And you say, well, that just can't work. Well, no, it works pretty well. It works pretty well. For many people, it means you don't have to actually till up the soil itself. It has different names. One's called lasagna gardening, okay, because you have different layers when you build lasagna, right? That's the same thing. You have different layers. It's also called sheet mulching sometimes, where you put sheets of mulch out or a lot of mulch out at one time. And it's also, there's a whole group of wood chip videos where they say, I grow in wood chips and this is what I use all the time. Here, you see in this photo, this is layering as well, but they simply have sides on it. So you can layer on top of the garden without sides, or you can put sides on it and make, in both ways, you're making raised beds in the process. Now, there's lots of different things that are suggested, but here's what always works, and the others are variations on this. What I like to do in an area, if I'm just going to layer, is to put a little compost down first. I like to have a little connection between what I'm putting on top and the bottom eventually. And so I just put a little bit of compost, not much. Then you put a weed barrier down. Could be cardboard, it could be newspaper. It doesn't matter. And this keeps weeds from beginning to grow up through this process. Then you put down a compost of some kind, one that has a little more nitrogen in it, like grass clippings, leaf mold, and some other things. And you put that down, that organic layer down, and then you mulch it. And then the mulch could be wood chips, it could be bark fines, it doesn't really matter. You can put things on the top. Okay? Well, some of these things will tell you need to layer brown and then green and brown and green and brown and different. That's okay if you want to do that. But basically, you need a weed barrier, some compost on top, and then some mulch on top of that. One of the most interesting ones, and one of the cheapest, is wood chips. Because wood chips you can get from your local arborist. Because when they do any kind of work like this, there's generally a truck that pulls the chipper behind them, and then they grind this stuff up and they go. Where they don't want to go is way back to some kind of landfill or landscape place where they dump it. They want to get rid of it and move on to their next site. They don't want to carry it around with them all day. So you can get wood chips for free. You can have wood chips delivered and dropped off where you want. Okay, you can call but they even have apps. This is an app called Chip Drop, but there's plenty of them out there, and on your phone, and you can say when you want it, and you can designate where you want it. Kind of puts a little map and shows, And then next thing you know, it shows up. Now, you can't say, I want wood chips and I want them delivered by 10 a.m. Tomorrow. And you can't say that. You say, I want wood chips. And then everyone knows who's looking for them. And so then they will just show up. Here it is, boom. But it's a way to get a lot of organic matter for free. Okay. The layering is a raised bed process. Here's without sides, okay? And here's with sides. And here you see the cardboard down, and then they're putting the organic matter on top of that. It's a simple process in that. And if you think, well, does that really work? Well, let me show you an extreme version of this. Hugelkultur. Hugelkultur, okay? Started in Germany a few years ago. And here, it's gardening in mounds. But you put your debris out without breaking it up, and then you cover it up. Kind of like this. And then you plant in the mounds, and you don't do anything. It all breaks down underneath there. You can do this in raised beds. And you see here, they've got logs and debris, and they just dump it in, and then they cover it up with some compost or some other organic materials, and then they grow in it. The reason I'm mentioning this is because don't be afraid about, well, this is some kind of magic formula. There's not. You can do this yourself. Okay, last thing. You can incorporate or you can layer. Incorporation is faster. You can do it right before you plant. So you can have your organic matter, you can incorporate it one day, and then you can even plant that day or plant it the next day. So on a weekend, you can do them both and you're done. Then, of course, you mulch it. And you mulch it every year, and you keep adding to that, and it makes it work. Layering takes a little more time. Layering is no-till, and so you don't have to worry about the process of trying to break up the soil, but it takes longer. Here, you want to start in the fall or the winter, build your layers and let it sit, and then in the spring, you just move the mulch pack and you plant directly into the material, and you've already mulched. But again, you want to mulch them every year. Okay? So you've got two basic ways of doing this. I like to have the raised beds because it's better drainage just to begin with, but incorporation directly also works too. Either one of these work for anything that we want, layering or incorporation. The only thing is trees, and the only caveat is be careful if you're using trees because you need stable soil for the trees, particularly as they get bigger, and so it's usually better in the ground. But other than that, you've got different options. So remember that there are many ways to build a soil, but the key is knowing that you got to build it, and two, getting to the program. Organic matter and either incorporating or layering, you can pick and choose. And one is not necessarily better than the other. One's more traditional, but the other works too. So the way for gardening to be as great as it can be in the South or anywhere is to have good soil. And the whole process then is to create that soil, and then you can plant almost anything that'll survive in your hardiness zone. Is fair game. All right? Well, I appreciate your attention in this matter, and if there's questions either now or perhaps a little later, we can get to them. But thank you so much, and I'll be happy to chat with anybody that has any issues with them.
Bill, that was fantastic. We've got a lot of questions. We'll get most of those at the end. One that's come up a few times that maybe you can address right now. I think I know the answer, but I'd like to get one from the expert. You talked a lot about clay because that's what we have here in Wake County, but we've got folks joining us from, I don't know, about 10 or 12 different states, and a lot of them from the coast or southern Wake County even, where there's sometimes some really fine sandy soils.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the beauty about much of what you were talking about. You want to address what you might do different or the same with sandy soils as opposed to clay soils.
Okay, well, that's a very good point. In fact, we did some research on this in the past, clay soils versus sandy soils. And if you're amending a clay soil, you can do this incorporation, this breaking up, and basically the actual tilling or breaking up of the material is a big component of making it better in clay soils. And then the organic matter helps to hold water. In sandy soils, it already drains pretty well. And so you want to put the organic matter in to feed, But also what we found is that in sandy soils, it tends to go away more often and it goes away faster. So in sandy soils, we see that incorporation needs to be, you don't need it for more drainage. So 25% organic matter into that soil generally works pretty well. The 50% works better in the clay. But you can add, so you can go with a little less in sandy soil, but you might want to have to put more in every few years. Not, you don't make it once, because that eventually, that as it breaks down, it goes on past the soil level and you end up with it being problematic. So you want to add the organic matter to hold the water, whereas in clay, you're trying to break up the clay so that it will drain. So it's a little bit different. Mulching, though, works really well. One of the things I find when you put mulch on is, since I grew up on the coast in Texas, is sometimes they will put rocks or pebbles as a mulch. And to me, it's okay, but you're defeating the purpose of building. And so if you're in sandy soil, you want to have mulches that do break up, because you want that organic matter to go in every year as much as possible. So if you've got to basically remulch every year with new mulch and it goes away, you're actually doing a good job in building the soil.
Thank you. Now we're going to have a lot of questions at the end about mulching, and I think it's going to be great to save until the end, because you mentioned having arborists drop chips for you, and I'm pretty certain that's a service that our next speaker offers as well. And I know he has some thought on mulching and things like that. So, and I'm sure Denisha probably does too. So we'll get to that at the end. We'll save the rest of the questions for the end. Those folks who've asked questions, we will get to them. If you don't feel like we're getting to it, make sure you just ask it again when we get to the panel Q&A at the end. We're going to